Hooker, harlot, lady of the evening. However you refer to those who do it.
I mean, they talk about, I believe, in biblical times, the Bible, and
Prostitution hasn't been pegged as the oldest profession for nothing.
no, right?
In the beginning, Boise was benefiting from the gold rush. And whenever a boomtown blossomed, well, the boom boom was not too far behind.
No, I mean, because it was men, men on the frontier, you always had more men than women. In 1863, 18% of the population were women in Boise.
Back then, work for a pioneer woman was hard to find.
Maybe a school marm, you could be a seamstress, a washwoman, or a housekeeper, essentially. There was acceptable and non-acceptable, and very little room for acceptable women to do anything else.
As for the non-acceptable assignments, those started almost right away in the City of Trees.
You had a woman named Madame Mustache. She was tough.
Her real name was Eleanor Dumont.
She was a well-known traveling prostitute. She was really popular.
In pictures, they tended to accentuate her famous features.
She had a little bit of peach fuzz, but they took that and they colored her mustache in more.
Madame Mustache was also a gambler. And when winning wasn't in the cards, well, carnal knowledge was a way to recover her losses.
She came in 1863 right from the beginning, and along 7th and Idaho Street, and then Idaho and 6th Street, Garrison back then because it went up to the fort. That's where basically the first brothels started up, and we're talking about a tent with a saloon tent, and then in the back, there'd be another, tent, a big tent, and there would be somebody working.
Soon, the search for gold in southern Idaho would go away, but the pursuit of passion would not. It just moved into more stable structures.
I would say in the 1880s, it started to change as the city started to develop with America. You get kind of like this lead up to the Gilded Age, right?
And that's when we see the rise of Davis Levy.
And so he opens an establishment called the California Bakery, and it was on what is now the east side of City Hall. And he starts building these structures, these tenement houses where City Hall is, kind of rough brick buildings.
So Levy starts renting out the top floors of these buildings to women on the fringe of respectable society. Soiled doves, painted ladies, parlor women.
He's like, there's money in this. And so he has offices on the top floor and these rooms for the prostitutes. And then on the bottom floor, he has more acceptable business, right?
And by the 1890s, Boise, the new state capital, is now thriving, which meant men like Levy,
miserly, dirty man who was really wealthy,
had to keep up with demand by adding smaller, less glamorous abodes behind his buildings, wooden shacks called cribs.
It was a much different life than the, younger, prettier, women in the parlor houses. Dirty, vice-ridden, diseased, immoral.
It was a wickedness that was well known and illegal, but left alone. Until another entity emerged, the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Well-to-do to wealthy women, and they want to clean up their town. And so they want to rid the town of prostitution, which until that point had been really Idaho Street from 5th Street all the way down to 8th.
Purging prostitution entirely would be almost impossible. So instead, they settled for consolidating it to one city block.
And they're like, well, we can condense this into the alleys and the upstairs of these rooms, and that's where we're going to have it.
Meaning where City Hall now stands was once the center of where some would lie with others.
Yeah, in the 1890s, they called it Whitechapel after London's Whitechapel. They also called it the Tenderloin, after Chicago's Tenderloin district.
But it was also known as Levy's Alley.
Yeah, people didn't like him. He rubbed people the wrong way.
That is, until his untimely death.
In October of 1901, they find his body in room number 13 in his main house, which was on the north side of Maine, where south side of City Hall is. Basically, Davis Levy was hit over the head one night and strangled with kind of packing twine, really strong but thin stuff. And then he was placed in his bed with a towel and a pillow on top of the towel over his face.
Would that be the conclusion of concubines in Boise? Not exactly.
It always morphs. It changes.
Historian Mark Iverson says business...
I know that the Smith building, or the Smith block, definitely had sex workers in it.
Just moved into buildings you might recognize today, like the Olympic above Mulligan's Bar.
That was the Clyde rooming house at one point, and there were boarding houses. There's a lot of heavy evidence that those were brothels.
And across the street, The Avery, which used to be the Manitou Hotel.
That was a brothel. The Chan Lee building where Flying M is, that definitely was a brothel.
So the next time you order a brew, hot or cold, just know you're likely on the bottom of one of Boise's original brothels.
I don't know what's going on now, but you know, it always seems to be with us in some capacity.